Welcome to CSIS Online. The way we bring you events is changing, but we'll still present live analysis and award-winning digital media from our Dracopolis Ideas Lab. All on your time, live or on demand. This is CSIS Online.
Great, welcome to CSIS. Thank you for attending this event on cybersecurity and quantum cryptography. Quantum computing is going to change the parameters of cybersecurity. I was going to say if you remember, which you probably don't, but if you know the origins of the internet, cryptography, classic cryptography is the backbone of much of what we do. And quantum is going to change that considerably. How it's going to change it is what we'll hear from three experts. We're lucky today to have Lisa O'Connor, who's the managing director of Global Security Research and Development at Accenture and leads their Global Security and Research Development Lab. J.R. Rao, who is the CTO of Security Research at IBM, and also has a global team that works in cryptography, cybersecurity, cloud mobility, mobile security. And finally, Dustin Moody, who is a mathematician and the project lead for PostQuantum Cryptography. At the PostQuantum Cryptography, you would think I'd never done this before, right? PostQuantum Cryptography project at the National Institutes for Standards and Technology. So thank you to all three. The format today will be conversational. I will open up with a few questions. If we have time, we'll get to questions from the audience. You can send them in the chat function or in some other activity. Let me start with Dustin, because Dustin, in December, you wrote a piece entitled "The Future is Now," right? How close is it? How much should we need to think about quantum computing and quantum cryptography? Is the future now, or do we have a couple minutes?
Well, good question. Researchers and very smart scientists have been working on building a quantum computer for a long time, a few decades, and they have been making more and more progress in the past few years. We've seen companies like IBM and Google and others having announcements of progress in the number of qubits and other metrics at getting larger and larger quantum computers. They're still relatively small scale in terms of the impact they would have to cryptography. They are big enough to do some applications, I believe. But I would say in terms of getting a large-scale quantum computer that would do all sorts of computation, we're maybe a decade or more-ish, roughly. No one knows for certain, but we still have a little bit of time.
Great. Lisa or JR, did you want to pitch in on that?
Sure. So I think we may be closer than we think. And let me just be a little provocative. So what we know in the research community and what we've been doing, we're operating with smaller qubit space, right? And to get to this impact point where we think we're going to be really impacting cryptography at scale, that requires a little more processing power. But I think we have to go back and look at cyber threat and think about what the threat is. And again, whether that's the academic sector or the public sector, we appreciate that there is probably more going on in other sectors. And I think that's kind of, that's sort of our lens for thinking about readiness and getting prepared for this inflection point where we're going to be vulnerable in our cryptography. Because it doesn't take solving all, it takes targeted focus. And it takes targeted focus at an adversary going after that communication or that thing that they want, past or present, right? And so, again, I think everyone has to appreciate sort of what the threat is against businesses, nation states, other things, and then think about what investments are being made and what that feels like. So it may be closer.
JR?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit more to this, trying to make a distinction. I mean, we do have quantum computers today. We have, I mean, you can, for example, speaking for my own institution at IBM, you have something called QuizKit, which is a toolkit that one can use to write quantum computing programs. And these are quantum algorithms for things like simulation or optimization in various fields. And you can have them actually run on a quantum computer. The key aspect here is that traditionally, if you look at the programs that you write now, they really will not give you a advantage over classical computers. So what we're trying to talk about here is when we say how close are we to quantum computing, especially in the context of security, when do we expect quantum computers to have evolved to the level of accuracy, to the level of qubits that we need, so that they start posing a significant threat to the IT systems that we have and to the cryptography that we've deployed. Now, and that's where I connect back to what my colleagues here, both Dustin and Lisa, have said, which is, it's not just the number of qubits, it's also the error rates and the accuracy that one needs to get. And so breaking something like 2048-bit RSA, for 2048-bit keys for RSA would require almost like 6,200 qubits and 2.7 billion operations. And my colleagues tell me the error rates are going to be 3 × 10⁻⁹. Given that the error rates today are like 10⁻², we are talking about 7 orders of magnitude. And so we do have some ways to go before we are able to get to the error rates that we would need to be able to field a machine and run programs that can actually pose a threat to the security and cryptography that we've deployed today.
Well, let's talk for a minute about what that threat looks like. It may be some years out. I will say that one of the things that always preoccupies people who do national security is the idea of technological surprise. So I hope you're right about how far out this is. I expect you are. But Lisa, why don't you start? What is the threat from quantum computing? How will it manifest itself? And then Dustin and JR, if you could touch on that one too.
So the threat from quantum computing, again, with what quantum computing does well, and so the things that quantum brings in terms of optimization, factorization, other things that actually affect our cryptography, affect many of the underlying services, but it's not just our cryptography. And this is where we kind of have to think broadly of where cryptographic methods are embedded in many things that we do in our business processes, in our communications, in our identity, let alone encryption, right? Just sort of thinking about data protection and communication security. But we have to look at where all of those methods are that could be vulnerable. And so when we hit that inflection point, and that's why we're talking about confidence and trust and error correction and the scale of quantum compute, because as we hit that inflection point, we are faced with a lot of risk to those services. And so I think the important thing is, as I look at it, is we're sort of in this borrowed time space right now as we're preparing and we're planning, we're ready for whatever Dustin's team approves and hands out and says, this is the algorithm, we're going with it. That we need to be preparing, understanding where the cryptographic methods are within our infrastructures, prioritizing those, figuring out what the exposure really is, and then thinking about re-architecting, taking methods now to potentially harden them a little bit more, or get to crypto agility. And crypto agility is really, we think of the Y2K challenge that we had, and this is probably ours, to really look at how do we extract these services and really modularize them. And so your cryptography, your cryptographic methods are as a service, so that we're ready for what NIST comes out with, and we're ready for future changes because we anticipate those too.
Yeah, I agree with what Lisa said. To be a little more specific in terms of the impact of quantum computers on cryptography, many crypto systems are broken down into one of two different types, what's called public key or asymmetric cryptography, as well as what's called symmetric key cryptography. And the impact on public key cryptography is quite dramatic. A large-scale quantum computer would be able to completely break all the public key crypto systems that we use today. That includes RSA, it includes elliptic curve cryptography, any other discrete log-based system. And so that's part of the challenge, is that we will need to completely replace those algorithms with new crypto systems which are resistant to attacks from quantum computers. Symmetric key crypto systems will also be impacted, just not as drastically. You'll be able to run an algorithm called Grover's algorithm on a quantum computer, and we won't have to swap out AES, for example. We'll just need to use a little bit longer key, no more than doubling the size of the key. So quantum computers will have definitely a disruptive aspect in terms of cryptography.
Great. JR?
Yeah, so let me, I fully agree with what Lisa and Dustin say, but let me add a little bit more to this. So, when you ask, what is the threat from quantum computers to cryptography and when are we going to see it? I think what my colleagues are saying, and I reinforce as well, is that the threat that we see from quantum computers is not when quantum computers come. The threat is today. The impact is something that's going to happen in the future. That's very important. The threat is today. And why is the threat today? Because we are using traditional key cryptography to secure our communications, to secure our data. And if this data, which is stored and secured, is harvested and set aside, we will see the impact, the risk of that in the future when quantum computing can be used to break the cryptography and reveal the secrets. And really, now you take that point that the threat is today, and you couple that with this other point, which is when we look at many of our critical infrastructure systems, whether we look at some of the systems that we use, that the financial services sector uses, like ATMs, or we look at even mundane artifacts like passports or credit cards, and you look at the crypto that is actually deployed in all these different scenarios. To add to Lisa's point, the life cycle when you actually upgrade this infrastructure is not as frequent as how you might replace cryptography. So you really need to be able to align the updates that you make to your infrastructure life cycles, whether it's your ATM networks, whether it's your mobile phone, with how you upgrade the crypto. And that cannot wait until what we say Q day or quantum day to come. It has to start now. And so because the threat is now, and we need to start preparing for it now.
We know that it's a pretty standard practice for big intelligence agencies to record and store communications they cannot break, looking forward to the time when they can break them. So I think that reinforces the point here that we ought to have Q surprise day. I hope we can avoid that. Someone mentioned, I can't remember if it was Lisa or Dustin, quantum resistant encryption, and some people call it quantum safe encryption. Can you tell us about that? What is it? What does it entail? What is quantum safe encryption? And Dustin, maybe if you can talk a little bit about what you're doing with algorithms, that would be helpful as well.
Sure, yeah. So it goes by different names, like you're saying, quantum resistant cryptography, quantum safe cryptography. We frequently at NIST use the term PostQuantum Cryptography. Mm-hmm. And basically what it is looking for new crypto systems to replace the ones that would be broken and will provide protection against attacks from a quantum computer. Now, these crypto systems are still going to need to be run on our classical computing technology that we all still have. So they're very much similar to the crypto systems that we have. They are just based on different ideas. RSA is based on factoring integers. Elliptic cryptography is based on elliptic curves. Some of these new ideas for post-quantum cryptography are based on other mathematical ideas such as lattices or error-correcting codes or multivariate algebra. And so at NIST, what we've been doing to help solve this problem, this challenge, is we've organized basically kind of an international competition that's been running for several years, where teams from around the world could send in designs that they'd created that would provide protection, new crypto systems, providing protection against quantum attacks. And so it's been going on about 4 years now. We've been evaluating and analyzing them internally, along with the cryptographic community around the world, so that we can select the most promising ones and ultimately standardize them so that people can use them in their products and applications around the world.
So it's kind of like the AES contest of a few years ago.
Yes, very similar to that idea. It's a bit more complex, but that's the same idea.
Great. JR, did you want to talk about quantum resistant or quantum safe?
No, I mean, I'm very excited. You know, I've had a reasonably long career in security. And, you know, I was there when, you know, we participated in the AES competition. That was truly a competition because we had a number of algorithms. And at the end of the day, Ryan Dale was selected to be the winner, and that was crowned as the AES winner. And then soon after that, and in fact, we were looking at NIST was standardizing on hash functions, and we participated in that as well. I believe that as we go forward in this, in NIST's post-quantum project, and of course, Dustin is the authority here, it's not as much a competition as it is a selection. That we are expecting not a single winner, but there would be more than one recommendation, is what I understand, Dustin, as we get towards the end of this year, beginning next year. And there would be, and that's probably appropriate because we would need different algorithms which will have different resource requirements that will run more efficiently in different kinds of compute architecture, which is just one thing. I mean, of course, they could also have different security parameters and so on. So really looking forward to this so that, you know, we can so we get a little more direction in terms of standards and the way we want to go, especially in terms of helping our customers secure their, you know, their quantum journeys.
I'll just say you're correct. Yes, we anticipated it will not be a single algorithm. It will be a small number.
Interesting. That's different from past practice, right? Pretty much.
It is a little bit. And a couple of reasons, JR touched on them. First one, though, is that we're looking to replace public key encryption as well as public key digital signatures. So we have two different functionalities, and we're going to need different crypto systems for each one. And then also, like JR said, for different applications, what we're seeing with the post-quantum algorithms right now is there's no silver bullet that will just be perfect in every application. So different applications, one algorithm might be a little bit better, as well as they're based on different mathematical properties. And since this is a newer field of research, it's good to not put all our security eggs in one basket.
Lisa, do you want to touch this one?
No, I just echo what Dustin said, because again, we know lots of algorithms that are incredibly difficult and might fit. Operationalizing those and putting those into a business environment, a networking environment, some of those are very difficult, or they don't perform to the specifications where they may be beautifully secure. And so this is a balancing act of finding the right ones that work in, if you will, practical implementation.
So we've talked a lot about the risk that quantum techniques and quantum computing poses to security and to encryption. What are the benefits? So in other areas, you know, sensors or some of the other things that might be of national security interest, there are benefits, potential benefits from quantum computing. What are the benefits, if any, for cybersecurity? Lisa, maybe you can go first.
Sure, I'm happy to. This is an area that we're really excited about, and we spent a lot of times at Accenture Labs digging into this because quantum has some really fun properties, and depending on what kind of quantum you're using, you can take advantage of those properties. And so, you know, we think about identity and how just using a very small number of qubits can really kind of catapult the quality of that identity. And we've worked on that. Some of the other things that, you know, we're thinking about is, you know, how do we take some of our security principles that we've had all along, and maybe we're implementing them in a new way. And I kick around the idea of revocation of access and revocation of data and things could take on a whole new light if we think about what that could mean with quantum entanglement. Maybe things just disappear, and we have the ability to do that at distance. I mean, there could be some really fun things as we start to take advantage of the quantum mechanics. But I think there are a lot of things that we look to the power of it, of actual quantum compute, in terms of ML, in terms of how we're implementing algorithms now to say, what kind of effectiveness, efficiency could that give us? And whether that's looking at risk calculations, whether that's looking at behavior, classification models, all sorts of things where they're the decisions of every day of being a cybersecurity operator, that if we can do it faster, better, high quality insights, we're in a different place with cyber defense.
So you're looking at how quantum and machine learning might interact.
Absolutely.
How will they interact? Is it just faster, or is it something else?
Well, the efficiency. So right now, during this time, we're doing simulations and looking at what are those efficiencies that can be gained. So it could be that that's a simplification of what the calculation is, or it could be a whole new level of insights that we can get to. I mean, the problem for security operators has been huge data at scale, and this is a big data problem, right? And so how do we think about that differently? And one of the other areas of research we get excited about is digital twins. And there's a really neat intersection of quantum and digital twins if we start thinking about how we're efficiently moving the data, the right data, through the digital twin, and that model of potentially enterprise security architecture, the model of your OT environment. Now, what does that do? And put in the power of quantum in that, and it starts getting really exciting when you get to the analytics.
Maybe for the audience, you could give them a quick definition of digital twin.
I got a white paper on it.
Great, and we're happy to post the link, but for the video,
yeah.
In fact, we might have posted the link already.
You actually, yeah, you may have. But yeah, a digital twin, in our case, we create what we call a cyber digital twin. And it's really a temporal knowledge graph. So temporal being time-sensitive knowledge graph, where we're pulling together attributes and building a contextual model of, let's say, enterprise security. So it is pulling the attributes of things from IT or OT that are relevant to what your security looks like. And that takes a lot of course, insights and intelligence to know what to pull, how to put it together. But that's our cyber digital twin.
Okay, great. JR? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry about that. So let me just add a little bit to what Lisa just said. You know, quantum mechanics and quantum mechanical principles are amazing, because one of the interesting concepts about quantum mechanics is that if you measure the state of a system, then you can actually alter the information that's actually flowing on that system. So in particular, you know, if you have, let's say, a classical communication line and you had a eavesdropper listening on it, there'd be no way to tell whether there's an eavesdropper listening on that. But then if you had like a fiber optic cable and which you're sending down, let's say, photons that represent qubits, then, you know, you can actually, if an eavesdropper tries to measure some of these qubits, then the state of those qubits would actually change, and it would be possible for the sender or the recipient to know that somebody is actually eavesdropping. So this is very, very interesting, because this opens up this whole new space for us. So something very simple, very fundamental and basic for us, like key distribution and key management. When you use quantum computing to elevate it to the next level, when you say, I want to do quantum key distribution, and when you start doing that, then you can start you know, getting some of the assurances that, you know, you were able to detect. If you know, you can, by using quantum means, you can detect if there's an eavesdropper. In that sense, quantum will make the task of managing key distribution that much more easier. And you know, this is not something that is a phenomenon that you can't really get with something like traditional communication methods. So you know, it is very interesting. So these are some of the attributes that I think quantum computing itself will bring, and will hopefully make some of our fundamental work around key distribution, key management easier. Now, on the other side, I mean, I think a very intuitive or a simple way of relating to the power of quantum computing is to say that, you know, you have problems that used to take exponential amount of time, you can get at least super polynomial speedups using quantum computing. And so what that really means is that you can do things in parallel, you can do things much faster. Lisa was alluding to big data. Many times you're looking at graphs in security, you're looking at knowledge graphs, especially with AI that you referred to. Knowledge graphs are a fundamental data structure in representing concepts and relationships. And especially in the area of threat intelligence and in trying to comb through the millions of potential indicators of compromise that one sees to find that proverbial grain of sand at the bottom of the ocean, how can you speed this up? How can you do this in parallel? So there are promises that quantum brings to the table. And these are some exciting applications, which I think the security community would benefit from as we go forward.
And Dustin, I know you're in the algorithm business, but what would you say about this question, and what are the potential benefits of quantum computing for cryptography?
They've hit on many of them. I mean, quantum computers in general will have a very positive impact in many science applications, medicine. Quantum computers are not a universal machine that will solve every problem, but for many problems, they'll be very well suited. JR mentioned quantum key distribution or quantum cryptography. That's a very interesting application that is positive, where you can have your cryptography essentially guaranteed by the laws of physics. So I'm sure we'll talk more about that. That's a positive application. I also think the chance we have where we're going to be transitioning to new algorithms, and Lisa mentioned crypto agility, that gives organizations a chance to look at the cryptography they're using and perhaps redesign their systems in such a way that they have more crypto agility, which is the ability to rapidly switch out your crypto algorithms for new ones. And that's a good practice independent of if your algorithm is quantum resistant or not. So I think the fact that we have a transition coming up, there will be challenges associated with that, but it also gives you a chance to make sure you're doing things correctly.
Yeah, and there's one more thing I'd add, and we'd be
Sure.
remiss if we didn't talk about it, and it's random, right? And that quantum has superpowers when it comes literally to random, to generating high quality random, which happens to be the basis for so much of our cryptography, our trust, identity, all sorts of things. And go back to the strongest cryptography. What is it? The one-time pad, right? We could be back to that, but faster. And so thinking about that, that's another feature that we get excited about as people in security, because we're like, wow, high quality random, all the things we could do with that. And that goes after a number of challenges.
To give people a little perspective, I interviewed a company that made cryptography for a particular critical infrastructure. And so I said, so how did you guys come up with a good random number generator? And they said, oh, it was easy. We have a list of numbers and then we randomly select. It's like, may not be what we had in mind. But so random number generation would be interesting to see. You could get, how would you apply that though? I mean, how would it be? Is it like a cloud service? I mean, would it be built into a product? How would it work?
It certainly could be. I mean, it could be seed key. It could be used for a number of things. Even as, one of the ideas that we're kicking around is where are the places that you might have depth, you might have repetition, you might not be truly generating random, but you could become predictable. And so we're going after some of those areas, thinking about cloud and instances in cloud and how they're generated, how they propagate, and do they become predictable? And so if you're able to insert high quality random into those events, we're removing a whole bunch of potentially, I guess Dustin can tell me if I'm using the word incorrectly, but cryptographic depth or depth in kind of how we're generating that.
Yeah, and I'm glad that Lisa brought up randomness. It's very important to have good random numbers for cryptography, like she mentioned, and that's definitely one of the applications of quantum computing technologies. I want to throw out there, NIST has what's called a randomness beacon that uses quantum technologies to generate random numbers every minute. It's published on the site, timestamped, and so you can go there for a public source of randomness. And there's other countries that have since made random beacons in a similar way. So if you don't trust NIST, you can combine other countries as well.
Shocking. Who doesn't trust NIST? So, JR, do you want to talk a little about randomness? I mean, I think this might be a little hard for some of the audience, but I think it's an important part of the cryptographic future.
Yeah, I think it's really, to have good keys that that are not prone to brute force attacks, and which rely on, at least in traditional cryptography, on things like good prime numbers. You need to have a good source of entropy, and that entropy really comes from having a good source of randomness. Today we have in our systems today, if you look at the state of the art, we build true random number generators, but sometimes they have what are called stuck at zero faults, which means suddenly a source of non-determinacy becomes very determinate. And as a consequence, if you don't detect that event, all the randomness after that is broken, and all the keys you generate after that are broken, and your security suddenly plummets down to zero or becomes very guessable, right? So to counter that, we use things like pseudo random number generators, where we have we rely upon some source of true randomness, but then we also use that as a seed, and we use different functions such as pseudo-random functions to be able to generate randomness from that. I think this would take us entirely to a new level in terms of the entropy of the source of randomness and the reliability of that source as we go forward. So yes, it is absolutely right what Lisa and Dustin have said, that entropy is the foundation and randomness is the foundation of achieving the guarantees of cryptography.
So a while ago, it used to be said that attacking the random number generator was a good way to achieve decryption. Is that going to change with quantum cryptography? If you were an attacker, you might look at the random number generator as an avenue into plain text.
I think that will still continue to be true. Not everyone will be using quantum sources to generate their entropy. And so I think attackers will continue to exploit that. And there have indeed been actual attacks where people have exploited bad randomness in the generation process to get access to systems. Yes.
Okay. So Lisa, you sent in a question that I thought was really interesting, which was, and I'd like to get all three of you to talk about this one. What should companies be doing differently now? I mean, what should companies be thinking about? What is the challenge? So for banks, for telcos, for a lot of the big companies that rely on encryption, for the cloud service providers, what should they be doing now? What should they be thinking about now?
Yeah, so I think there are kind of two sides of this one. What do you do for the defense? And what do you do for the offense? How do you use it for good, right? How do you take advantage of thinking about what quantum compute can do for the business? On the defensive side, I think we talked about, crypto agility and the homework that is needed now. So if your companies or agencies have not started planning for this, you're at T minus who knows, right? And you need to start, because these are not small changes. These are big efforts for identifying where these things are, prioritizing them, and developing the right strategies for refreshing or getting to that crypto agility, or getting to a different architecture where you're protected and you think you're in an enclave. I don't know if those exist anymore, but let's pretend. So, but that's the preparation for crypto agility, which is literally it is a multi-year journey. It is not going to happen quickly. If anyone remembers swapping out SSL certificates, wasn't that fun? One piece, right? So we remember what that took. And then on the kind of positive side on business, I think there's an opportunity, and when you think about what the power of quantum is and how it could change how we think about some of our business challenges and some of the problems that were really hard with classical computing, yet now with quantum, they're back in the realm of possibility, and they're back in the realm of an efficient calculation, or we'll say number theory, math that we didn't have access to before, right? And that's the quantum compute. So there is there should be a process going on of thinking about, from a business perspective, where are the opportunities to engage with quantum, and start doing that now in planning and thinking through what those good business processes are, and picking ones that aren't too far out or too complicated to show some early wins on what the power of quantum could do to some of these complex calculations, or some of these things that are large intractable kind of problems that we may have shelved. And I'd love to hear what JR has to say about this.
Thank you, Lisa, for that key up. So look, I fully agree with your carrot and stick characterization of quantum, and that is true for most technologies that we see. I think quantum is real. This is the decade of quantum. Within the next decade, we will see quantum be very real for us. And so what in every industry, it has the power to be very disruptive. And insofar as companies are planning their strategies and planning for the future, they should follow the development of quantum. They should look at what areas of their businesses can actually benefit from quantum. They should identify the opportunities that would help them gain competitive advantage in quantum, especially so because many times, in some of these industries, it may be that it's winner take all, right? And so, if you look at industries that rely on like chemistry or material physics, right, material sciences, there are, you can do large scale simulations very accurately of large molecules. And you can even develop materials which have, new desired properties. And, something like that could help you corner a significant part of the market. You could also have much more sustainable, much more energy efficient processes. We've done some work with some of the car manufacturers around designing better batteries, looking at thermodynamics of materials, using pricing derivatives, for example. So there's a lot there's a lot of invention that can happen that is very disruptive to the marketplace, and that could see a significant realignment of market shares of different companies as we go forward. Now, having said that, of course, the flip side of it is the stick side, right? Which is also what Lisa talked about, which is preparing for the threat of quantum to currently how we actually do business today. And that is the threat to some of the security mechanisms, and that led us down the path of quantum safe cryptography.
Dustin, did you want to add anything to that?
I think they've hit most of the highlights about doing an internal analysis to figure out, where you stand and where you want to be, making sure you're doing that. I'd caution against maybe acting too quickly in terms of we're still in the process of selecting what algorithms to standardize, and we would not recommend that anyone pick an algorithm and start using it in advance of having standards so that you don't end up using the wrong thing. Our timeline is that at the end of this year, we expect to name the first algorithms to be standardized, and then it will probably take us another year or two to draft that document and get public comment and everything. So start preparing, and within a year or two, you'll be able to start knowing the algorithms, and that it'll start filtering out into products. You can start adopting it, but don't act too quickly in that regard.
As I was listening to this, one of the things that occurred to me was, well, it's a three-part question, so that means it probably won't make any sense. So get ready. This is a complicated project, and so a lot of companies won't have the resources or the wherewithal to undertake the kind of action that we're talking about. And so, how expensive is it going to be for companies to think about quantum? You can guess on that. Can we ever look for something like a quantum startup? Do they exist? I mean, is that just even the realm of the possible? And finally, will quantum cryptography or other quantum things, we're already moving in this direction, but should we be thinking about quantum as a service, which is one of the tricks now in IT, just put as a service after any other verb. So where do you see, what's the challenge for a company here? Is it money? Is it personnel? Are they better off looking for an outside supplier? What would you advise? Because when we did the SolarWinds review, we found that many companies perhaps didn't take some of these cybersecurity issues as seriously as we might have hoped. So it's hard to see them suddenly waking up and deciding to also take quantum seriously. What would you advise companies? Wait until it's available and buy it as a service? look for the startup you can acquire, or build your own capacity. Any views on that one?
I would say build your own capacity, and then I'll come over and play. No, at this point, and this is a really interesting place to watch startups and what's happening in the ecosystem, because a year ago, hundreds, right? And now we're seeing some sorting out in the marketplace of what is sustainable and what is showing progress and buy-in. And so this is not a place where non-technology companies should be investing in literally building quantum. I would leave that to the experts to build the quantum, and again, work their magic. Now, what I would say is there are all kinds of ways that businesses can get engaged with quantum now, and that is thinking through what business challenges, what fits, and there you can engage lots of consultative expertise in the journey of thinking through what to bring towards quantum, what business problem you bring towards it, what's your roadmap towards that, what kind of accomplishments do you want to get in what time frame. But as a service, absolutely. And we're seeing that, right? All of these, most of them are accessible via cloud. And that makes it sort of tremendous to do the simulations and practice and sort of get your sea legs, if you will, with understanding what it can do for the business problem at hand. And I think that's useful experiences, because that's going to inform how you invest forward in emerging tech, whether you're going all in to invest in timeshare or invest in other things. And that's important for the business direction to know what ROI you're going to get out of it. So you really want to pick things where you can demonstrate that.
JR, did you want to pick up?
Yeah, sure. Three-part question. So let me try to address them. So I agree with what Lisa says, that this is not going. You really need experts to weigh in on how quantum computing is going to be deployed and be used in practice across the industry. Now, I do believe that when quantum becomes real in terms of industry strength machines and so on, it is going to really unleash upon us, and it will open up possibilities the likes of which we haven't seen before. And the way that this is going to happen, though, is I think it's not going to be a single company that does this. I do believe I don't think it's within the wherewithal of a single company to achieve this. I do believe the right way to do this is sort of the public-private partnership that we have seen, again, between experts in the space, between the likes of which we are seeing with NIST and academia and industry, the experts that have to come together to actually advance not just the fundamental science, but also to develop the roadmaps and how we will navigate to this future where we start harnessing quantum. Now, companies themselves, look, there is a lot of space for innovation here. Crypto agility, of course, has been mentioned. Some of the universities, for example, are setting up quantum ecosystems. And I recently read about how University of Chicago is setting things up around, in the Chicago area. There are things around the University of Waterloo in Canada and across the board, right? The stakes are high. As I mentioned, many times it's like a winner take all. So there's a lot of room for innovation. And so there is a place for startups in response to your second question. Now, the third part you asked, is this going to be quantum as a service? So I think one has to visualize a little bit what this future is going to look like. It's going to be very different from what we are used to today in terms of having compute in the hands of everybody, right? And multiple compute, right? My iPhone, my laptop, my smart, my iPad, and so on. What it's going to look like, it's going to be a hybrid future in which we'll continue to have classical computing mechanisms, right? These will not go away. But then we will have, centers where we have, quantum computers integrated with what we know, for example, as high-performance computing. For example, if in the United States, if you look at the Department of Energy labs, which field a lot of the DOE labs, which field a lot of HPC systems. So HPC will be integrated with quantum, and there would be workflows, industry-specific workflows that run across them. And the results of the explorations that are conducted by them are going to be made available for consumption across industries and to endpoints. So that's how the value of quantum, the value that quantum is going to unleash, will flow across society. And so if you keep that in mind, it's not just going to be quantum as a service. Yes, there's going to be an aspect of that, but we have to look at individual domains, and we have to see what kind of hybrid architectures are going to make sense to investigate certain areas, how we leverage existing investments in HPC, for example. Think of the oil exploration, the geophysical explorations that the oil industry does, for example, and then how you marry those with what are the aspects of the exploration problem that are amenable to quantum mechanical principles and can be speeded up, and bring that together, and then you make that available to the benefit of society. So all this work remains to be done, and this has started to many of our customers are thinking about this. As I might give you some examples, and that's how we have to think about the future.
Hey, Dustin, let me tweak the question a little bit. What sort of programming skills are you going to need for this? I mean, when you hire somebody, what do you look for? And not just math. I mean, we get that. Math is part of it, but are people different programming languages, same programming skills? What should we be teaching people?
I think what they're learning is good. These new crypto systems being proposed, they require different types of math, but it's learning lattices or learning error correcting codes. So you have to learn some new ideas, but no, we don't need new programming languages or anything in that regard. Experts who are well-versed should be able to adapt. It's a little bit more complicated than elliptic curves or RSA, but it's not unfathomable.
I'm going to pick on you a little bit more. When you think about what NIST should be doing, what are the tasks for NIST moving forward? Both what you want to do, say, in the next year, besides launch the algorithm, first algorithm, what do you want to do long term? So what's the tasking for NIST?
So yeah, right now we're finishing up getting the algorithms, but that process will continue even after we name them. There are algorithms that we are interested in that still need a little bit more time for study. So we will continue the process of looking at different algorithms to see if they should be standardized or not. We're also very much wanting to provide cryptographic guidance about the transition, and so that will be coming out. You can't give that advice until there's new algorithms to transition to, but once that is, we'll have documents for that. I would point people as well to our National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, kind of our partner organization, has also established a project to help with the migration and transition, and is actively writing a playbook to help organizations prepare. And it's also a good place where you can give input. We would very much like to know, will these crypto systems we're considering, will they work for you? Are the keys too big? Do they run fast enough? So long term, we'll continue to keep our eye on any threats to our standards that we have. We'll adapt as we need to, revise our documents. Quantum was a new area, we've seen it coming and we're preparing for it, but I anticipate in the future there will be other attacks, other challenges, other new technologies, and we'll continue to make sure that we have the strong cryptography that our nation and our industries around the world need.
Let's conclude with a couple policy questions. So, the first one is the US organized right for quantum? Is the National Quantum Initiative enough? In my head, when I was preparing for this, I was comparing what we do on quantum with what we do on AI, right? So are we doing the right thing on quantum? Do we need to do more or different? Are we organized as a government and as a country for quantum research, quantum cryptography? You can answer that one anonymously if you want.
So let me take a stab at answering this. So absolutely, I think definitely we are doing a lot in quantum. We have the sort of the quantum initiative. Look, the very fact what NIST is doing is something that has been imitated and adopted worldwide. The different countries are looking at quantum, trying to figure out what their own standards are. We set that trend here, and the world is being picked up worldwide. Means we're doing some of the right things, right? And so not just that, when, we know, for example, that the different agencies of the federal government, for example, are looking very carefully at what their quantum risk is, what their exposure is. And they are beginning this journey towards doing a risk assessment, putting in place crypto agility mechanisms to be ready for Q-Day so that they can upgrade and modernize. And so in that sense, they are serving as some of the guinea pigs or the early exemplars of early adopters trying to test and provide feedback into how some of these upgrade programs would actually run. Now, definitely, I think more could be done. The research community is, of course, involved, but in terms of making sure that we have adequate skills in the workforce, in terms of making sure that one of the big things, we all know about the security industry is the buzz is around the White House executive order that came out on May 12th, which a significant part of it is around securing supply chains. And supply chain is so critical for our well-being and our well-being and survival. And so, how to make sure that we have a healthy and secure in a quantum sense, a supply chain, for example. So some of these discussions would also bleed into that. So I think we are we have a very good start as a nation. I think we do have many initiatives underway, and now we just have to follow those through and build up the skills and the expertise to make sure that it's going to take a number of years. I think NIST makes this point in its in their recent report on PostQuantum Cryptography. It's going to take maybe even decades before we can secure all the systems out there in a quantum sense. And so we're going to live in a hybrid world for a while, and that could provide a very rich and fertile ground for attackers to exploit. So how are we going to cope with this, and how exactly are we going to migrate to a quantum safe future? Again, it's going to be through public-private partnerships, and again, we have to show the way and set the standards, I believe.
Lisa, another view from the private sector. We'll save Dustin for last.
Yeah, I think we should invest more.
Well, I was going to say, usually people
I would
more
love
money,
more investment in this area, because it is. The good news is this is research, but it gets applied very, very quickly. We think about the life cycle, and unlike AI, as you used AI as a sort of a yardstick. AI, we didn't have to change the compute. We have classical compute. We're not changing kind of the thinking. We are changing the whole math. We're changing the system, right? And so number theory. Quantum is so different that it does take a big investment to get moving. And the good news is many private sector companies, academia, other places, and in the government have done that, right? But I asked the question, what would it look like if we do more? What would it look like if more were out there to really fuel this and speed this? And I think that could be interesting. The one thing I would not like to see, having said that, is I appreciate the innovation at hand. We have many different approaches to this, and we have lots of different creative thinking about how to take advantage of it, how to harness the power of it in different circuits and different technologies to get to quantum. And so that's interesting too. And you risk sometimes by putting a big monolithic pot out there and saying we're going to do three things, that you may miss some of these other creative things that are going on. So again, a balancing act, but I would love to see more energy to this.
Dustin, noting that you're a public servant, do you want to touch the idea of federal policy and where we could improve it if necessary?
Oh, I don't want to touch too much. It's probably above my pay grade. I'd say, yeah, the government is doing a good amount in quantum, as well as, around the world, governments are spending a lot of money on quantum. From my perspective, it never feels like quite as much as is being focused on post-quantum cryptography as well as other technologies, but I'm probably biased in that regard because that's what I work on. Yeah, it's besides post-quantum, there are many exciting and interesting applications that we need to be looking at as well. And government should be involved as well as private organization, yes.
it does seem to have bipartisan support on the Hill, which is a good sign. So I'm tempted to ask you, if you had $1 to spend more, would you spend it on AI or quantum? But let's save that one. That's a tough one. That's what budgeters have to think about. I warned you in advance that you can't have a CSIS panel without saying the word China. So tell us your thoughts about where the Chinese are. You know, I hate the phrase race, but when you compare the Chinese industry, Chinese research to the US, I will tell you that a couple of years ago, when we could still travel, I met with some Chinese quantum researchers, and they struck me as the real deal. So I don't, sometimes when the Chinese say stuff, it's for public consumption. That wasn't my impression. This was on quantum cryptography. So where do you rank China? What do you think China's doing on this stuff? I don't know who wants to go first. Because frankly, they could be one of the potential attackers, right? We all know that. And we're probably recording things. They're certainly recording our stuff. And my bet is they'll revisit it when they have a quantum capability. So where do you put China on this scale?
Well, I'll go ahead and go first, maybe. I think in regards to quantum cryptography and quantum key distribution, QKD, China is investing a lot of money in this particular aspect. They've launched a satellite that can do QKD with the ground. They've built a very large quantum backbone. For the most part, these applications, I think, are for very high secure needs like government and military. This isn't what the average user is going to be using, but they are definitely investing a lot in that type of technology, and they're very, I think, quite advanced in it. But with regards to post-quantum cryptography, they certainly are aware of the threat. Our competition has been a pretty good international competition. We have had a little bit of Chinese researchers that have participated, but China basically has decided to do their own thing as well. They announced their own internal sort of competition that was done on a much smaller scale, at a much faster scale. China historically doesn't use the same standards that the United States recommends, and so that will continue. So they have their own algorithms that they will use. They're similar in nature to the ones that we're looking at in our process, but different.
JR, do you want to talk about China?
Yeah, I don't know if I can add a lot more to what Dustin has covered. Look, I mean, the Chinese are up there, right? There is absolutely no doubt. The President Xi has actually had announced a while ago that his ambitions was to build the world's largest quantum computing research facility. And they've been, and judging by their turnouts at different conferences, including the American Physics Society meetings and so on, they have been steadfastly marching down that goal. So absolutely, this is up there. It is a matter of national security for them, as Dustin said, and they are there. And yes, in terms of the quantum safe cryptography, I think they ended there. There was a paper on Archive that talked about selection of their candidates. I mean, I think they picked a couple of algorithms for public key encryption and digital signatures that were being considered by NIST as well, and they changed them, they revised them for whatever reason. And so they have actually a paper on Archive that talks about, and this actually concluded end of 2019, I believe. That's when they put this paper out. So they are marching along, and yes, they continue to be somebody that we need to keep an eye on as we go forward.
Lisa, you do threat research. So when you think about threat research in quantum, what are your conclusions?
Yeah, so we follow the money. We follow what the spending is and how much governments are investing either into companies or back into government research programs. And it is a significant amount. I think, what is it, 10 billion and then a 7% year over year. And not that that's all towards quantum, it's, quantum AI, I think it's a little bit blended, but those are big numbers and those are big investments. And what we know in studying nation states is these are sustained campaigns, right, of investment and acquisition of emerging tech and use of it. So we need to keep an eye on it, and we do follow this in our cyber threatscape reports that we publish. So you'll see things in there, snippets on what quantum investments are happening and what we suspect.
We've reached the end of our hour, so let me ask if any of you have any final remarks or words of wisdom you'd like to contribute here before we close the program. If not, I'll tell you, I got 3 lines, and then I'll give you a minute to think. 3 lines that I think will be the lines that dominate this program. Lisa, you said quantum has real fun properties. That's a great quote. I thought that was going to be the line of the week. But then, JR, you said it's a decade of quantum, and that's just too good to pass up. And then Dustin, first algorithm by the end of the year. So we covered a lot of ground. Thank you for doing this. Any final remarks? No? Well, Lisa O'Connor, J.R. Rao, Dustin Moody, thank you for participating in this. And thanks to the audience for tuning in. It will be available on YouTube as well. We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.